Hello, Instagram world. And I suppose it'll go to Facebook and YouTube. Um, I wanted to pop on. I've had so many thoughts lately, and it's like there's not enough posts or podcast episodes or whatever to really address everything that comes up. But there's so much that I feel needs to be addressed in the birth world around industrialized birth and women taking back their power. And I don't know how to put it all together in one space so everyone receives information the way that they need to. I'm in so many different, even natural birth groups on Facebook. I'm in several of them. And I remember back when was pregnant with my first son and how I was searching for information. So I understand this process. So I need to step back and figure out, how do I speak to women? How can I be a supportive space for someone who I used to be? And that's really where I'm coming from and what I want to be here to serve. So like when I was pregnant with my first son, I wasn't a holistic person by any means. But as I started to walk down that road in that pregnancy, I had resistance to the allopathic birth world, the medicalized birth process in hospitals. I even had a midwife. I never had an OB. And I would suggest, here's my first suggestion, my first tip. Unless you have some sort of medical condition that requires a more intensive support system, if you don't already have some sort of pre-existing condition that makes you high risk, and that's even not necessarily a reason to have an OB. Your main reason to ever have an OB, honestly, is to have a C-section. If you're not choosing to have a C-section, then you should avoid an OB. And I say this because even from my experience with a nurse midwife, who was a fairly natural-minded person, and it was a fairly natural-minded hospital that I birthed my first son. But even in that situation, of course my kitty needs to be right up in my business. Even in that situation, I probably had best case scenario of a hospital birth when I had preeclampsia. And even in that situation, I experienced so many unnecessary interventions pushed on me, pretty much non-consensual procedures. I felt like I was in a constant defense of my health, of my birth, of my baby. I was constantly feeling like I had to fight back from pressures that didn't feel resonant with me. And that is essentially what you get in a hospital, is you're going to feel like you're on defense. And that's why people get doulas, because you want someone to advocate for you. But here's the caveat. Even getting a doula, they still have to abide by certain procedures. They can't bypass certain things. They're there to advocate for you. But in the end, they're still kind of standing by as certain procedures happen or certain non-consensual situations happen. They become a sidekick of the doctors, of the hospital protocols. And that's nothing against doulas, because I know doulas get into the work that they do for very good reasons. And I had initially looked into becoming a doula as well. And can a doula be a helpful support system? Absolutely. Especially in certain situations people experience in hospitals. But If you are looking for a natural birth, if you want to be empowered in your birth, if you want to have a physiological birth that is not disturbed by anybody else, that isn't controlled by a doctor's system, by someone who's following protocol in a hospital just to kind of bring you through the system in order to keep you on a certain schedule, get you scheduled for a C-section or an induction to meet the needs of the hospital's schedule or the doctor's schedule, then you need to stop going to a hospital. And this is a bold statement, and there's going to be pushback, because there's always pushback of the, but what if this and this and this happened? But I know somebody who this and this and this happened. There's always the exception, and there's always the story. There's always the story to justify why people keep going to, why women keep going to hospitals to birth. But until we truly step back and dissect what is happening in hospitals to women, we aren't truly going to understand what's happening, because I am an example of someone who went through that system, experienced mistreatment, experienced abuse in a way that I didn't even understand at the time until after the fact. I experienced the cascade of interventions that at the time I kind of was coerced into, like, we need to do this because your blood pressure is high and you have protein in your urine and you have swelling and this and this and this. And all the little tiny things they do along the way that slowly brings you to a highly compromised birth on the brink of C-section. And I am damn lucky that I didn't have a C-section, because had I not been an advocate for myself, had I not known as much as I did, having done the research during my pregnancy, I would have been another one of the C-section cases. But that also goes to show that we need to be more liberated and empowered in our own voice. I'm a stubborn person, especially when it comes to the medical system. I had seen that before getting in there. I was already not going to get shots, not going to get vitamin K, not going to get the eye cream, and I wanted delayed cord clamping. I already knew those things, so I already knew I had a resistance to certain regular procedures in the hospital. So I knew that I was kind of in a fight against them. And when you are in labor, you should not have to feel like you're fighting your support system, because that's an instant disturbance. That is instant. He's in fight mode right now. That is an instant compromising of your birth. It's compromised. It puts you in stress. You're not comfortable in your environment. People are constantly poking and prodding at you, pushing you for procedures that you probably don't want to do anyways. In the end, birth is so simple. It's simple if we let it be. It becomes complicated when we don't nurture our bodies the way that we're supposed to. We aren't in union with our bodies. As women, we have such a disconnection because we weren't brought up in a way to be in reverence of our body, to cherish it, to see the beauty in it and not be ashamed of it, not be embarrassed of our period, of our birth process, to make noise, to move, to get in positions that feel comfortable for you to birth a baby. There's a lot of fear still prominently around birth, and we need to do our work, our ancestral healing. This is a deep ancestral wound. It's a witch wound to begin with, because it brought us into a submissive role. To go along, don't push buttons too much. You need to kind of go under the radar. You don't want to be persecuted, so just go along with what they want you to do. And then it became an entire paradigm built on fear. It's dirty at home. It's dangerous. Your baby's going to die. You're going to die. So you need to be in the hospital because it's the safest place to be. But it's all stories. It's all stories because the research doesn't support that theory. Home birth is not more dangerous than hospital birth. I would actually say completely the opposite. There has been so much death and unnecessary surgeries, interventions, shots, and medicines given to women and babies in birth that is absolutely not necessary. And in many instances, it causes deep trauma in women and babies. It causes health problems when we're considering the medications being used, long-term complications from things like epidurals and C-sections, pelvic and uterine issues. We have so many issues when it comes to the pelvic floor and issues with after birth because of how we're mistreated. Episiotomy is another example. Women having been cut for centuries, decades at least. I don't even know when that started. My guess is in the 1800s, possibly earlier than that. And the stitching that they do, the extra stitch that they recommend, that because they want you to be tight for your husband. Look into why these things happen. It is not because it's best for women. There's been such a misinformation, not paradigm, that's not the word I'm looking for. Such an agenda of fear, shame, and the absolute distrust of the woman's body and physiological birth. We've overcomplicated birth for a long time now. Primarily, I'm going to talk about how it started. Primarily, we're going to say for the past century, because that's where most of my understandings and research come from. The early 1900s is when it really was brought into hospitals, and it became this profiting industry after the war, and highly taken over by men in that time as well. And there's a lot of reasonings behind the procedures that they started doing that benefited men and suppressed women's voices. It didn't trust the women's body. It put men in control of birth. Men don't belong in birth. They don't. Birth is women's wisdom. It's women's bodies. Has been the women's wisdom for all of humanity. Birth is a woman's space. I truly don't think men belong there, except to be the support of their spouse, of their woman partner as the father. And I think there needs to be so much more education for men as well of how to be in birth. Because I can tell you from my experience, the father of my children, my now ex-husband, was so uncomfortable and didn't know what to do during my births, specifically the 2 home births that we had. Like, it was not a supportive partner that I would have wanted, and nothing necessarily against him. It was just because he wasn't raised to understand what birth is, what natural birth is, how to be the supportive partner in that kind of birth. And a lot of men aren't. The way birth is presented on TV and movies and still creates such a fear of pain, of death, and of issues that when we get all of this in our mind, it becomes a mind battle. That the more we think about and worry about the possible problems, energetically, you're manifesting that as a result. People don't realize how powerful our energetic resonance is when we are in these energies of fear and worry and anxiety and guilt or disempower energy. So until we can, as women, heal these wounds of our past, to be able to be confident and strong in knowing the ability of our bodies to birth, to trust in our bodies to birth, and to know how to support our body to be in the most healthy, nourishing environment for our babies. And that's step one. Being able to nourish and support our body to be able to create a baby, to support a baby. And then birth in turn becomes much more easy. I don't want to say easy. It's not really easy. I mean, there is an ease to it. Like I said, I had health issues in my first pregnancy that automatically would have put me in a risk factor category had I gone back to a hospital. I would have already been seen as a risk factor with the blood pressure issues, all that. And it would have compromised it all. Except I was diligent in supporting my body to prevent those issues from happening. And then they didn't. And then I had 2 amazing home births after that. And I'm not the only example. I'm just of that happening. It happens all the time when women see. And all I hope for as a birth keeper to support women is to be able to support women before they have to experience those traumas and experiences in hospitals where they feel so unheard, like they're an observer of their birth rather than being the conscious, highly, you shift consciousness. You're going to the portal of life and death when you bring babies in through you. In a hospital, you don't experience that type of initiation process. It's not the beautiful initiation process that you deserve and should receive. And that is our pathway into a very beautiful and sovereign motherhood, is by having that birth where we are the authority. And we are the ones who call the shots. And that can only happen when we step outside of the system that is profiting off of our disempowerment. When we step back into the village of women, back into the community of women who are there to support and serve the mother, not serve a profiting industry of the medical system. Coming back to physiological birth and the women's wisdom of birth is serving women who are the ones who are the authority of their birth. And it changes everything. It changes how we birth, and it changes how we mother. And it changes how we walk into the world. And it's a powerful shift of humanity. And it'll change the trajectory of our future. It really will. When we're giving birth to these babies in a beautiful, comfortable, sovereign environment, they're not coming in through trauma. Because when they're being brought into the world in a traumatic way, that affects them as well. It's a root chakra-based trauma. So babies are coming in with root chakra-based traumas because of how they're being born. And that is also traumatizing the mothers, and it affects their bonding and the whole the beautiful 4th trimester postpartum process, which is the bonding, sacred bonding period of baby and mother. It's being compromised because of how babies are being born in hospitals. And there's so much to say. And there's no way of doing it all in one video. But I just wanted to go on, and the main reason I wanted to come on here tonight is because, like I said, I have been in these Facebook groups for a long time, a lot of natural birth, holistic motherhood kind of groups. And the things I see most often that I don't want to say frustrates me, because I get it. I started in the same place. So I get the questioning of like, what am I able to do? My doctor doesn't agree with me. So what am I supposed to do when they want me to do this or schedule a C-section and I don't want to do that? We need to understand our options. And we need to understand that no one dictates to you how you birth. You do not have to be in a hospital. You do not have to have an OB or a doctor to give birth. You can go home and do it by yourself. Or with I don't necessarily suggest doing it. There's kind of that ultra independence that's come to with the free birth world, which I highly support free birth, but I don't necessarily agree with the idea of going home and birth all alone either. I think it's a very beautiful thing when you can have the support system still of women with you, so you don't feel alone. I don't think being alone to birth is the next option when you're wanting to step out of the system of disempowerment. We can go home to birth and still have a support system. And that's why I'm going into birth keeping. I haven't attended births yet. However, that is the direction I'm going. And I'm always available for coaching sessions or support sessions for anybody who is interested in birthing at home or leaving the system and they just don't know where to start. Or to go through and have a session around past traumas or past birth experience that have kind of held you back from having a home birth, because that's really where to start too. If you've had past experiences where you feel scared to do a home birth because you don't think you can do it, or a doctor is telling you that you can't have a home birth, that's all crap. So I also offer sessions for kind of that past trauma healing as well, in being able to kind of cleanse out your system to find that empowerment that you need and the options that you have, because you always have options. If you ever have any doctor that tells you that you have to do a certain thing because they're telling you to, and you have no other option, you need to walk away. Walk the fuck away. Because your birth is already compromised. And just the stress of someone telling you that you have to do something that you don't want to do is going to compromise your birth too. Because I know my blood pressure always went up when I went in the hospital. Even walking into the hospital, it affected my blood pressure every time. But they wouldn't listen to me if I said that. I told them, just being here is kind of stress. I have anxiety coming in here, and I never wanted to go in there. But of course, then it became another risk factor on their list of things to tell me that I needed to be induced. And I'm just lucky it didn't end up in C-section. It would have been if I wasn't stubborn like I am. So if you're looking for any support, if you're in a situation where you're not sure what your next option is, if you want a home birth but you don't know where to start, someone's telling you they have to do something that you don't want to do in your birth, reach out to me. I'd love to talk, because no woman should have to feel alone in this process. It's supposed to be such a beautiful initiation and ritual into motherhood, and it's become such a trauma in women and motherhood. And I am here to help change that. And I know many women are too. And I know it's time for this change to happen. So I hope you all have a beautiful evening. Bye.